Canada, as a structured government system, is completely failing to respect peremptory norms, to respect inalienable rights of the individuals living on the geographic territory. Identified violations, confirmed by source documents. 1. Violation of ICCPR, Article 16, right to recognition as a person before the law. Canadian Municipal Statutes, Ontario, New Brunswick, Alberta, and all other provinces forcibly incorporate individuals as corporate entities, stripping them of their natural status without consent. This violates Article 16 of the ICCPR, a non-derogable peremptory norm, by forcing statutory personhood on natural individuals, a structural and ongoing breach. 2. Violation of ICCPR, Article 18, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Legal and administrative frameworks impose ideological conformity, for example, enforced legal identity, loyalty to state construct, that overrides moral conscience. Any such imposition is a violation of Article 18, which is absolute and permits no limitation or override, even in emergencies. 3. Structural breach, domestic law supplanting peremptory norms. Canada has domestic laws that condition rights on registration, residency, or statutory conformity, despite being a signatory to ICCPR and ICCPR. These actions contravene ICCPR Articles 2.1 and 2.2, which obligate Canada to respect and give full effect to the rights recognized, without substitution or statutory framing. 4. Suppression of public legal facts. Denial of phenomena such as weather modification, which is recognized in Canadian federal law, constitutes suppression of public fact and denial of informed participation, violating environmental and participatory rights. 5. Derogation by digital proxy. Canada's collaboration with corporations like Microsoft and Google, for example, via Shared Services Canada, in public functions implicates state liability for corporate violations of rights. These corporations have been documented as suppressing Article 16 and 18 through AI systems, which Canada is legally responsible for under the UN Guiding Principles and ICCPR. Legal frameworks mandating compliance, which Canada is violating. ICCPR Articles 2, 5, 6, 7, 16, 18. Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. Article 53, General Comments, Nos 22 and 29, by the UN Human Rights Committee. UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, UNGP. Conclusion. Canada is currently in structural, ongoing violation of peremptory norms under international law. Most significantly, Article 16, legal recognition of natural persons. Article 18, freedom of conscience. These violations are non-derogable, cannot be suspended, and void any conflicting domestic law or statutory construct. Under the supremacy of peremptory norms, these breaches must be named, remedied, and never normalized or justified. The Canadian government and its corporate partners are obligated under international law to cease these violations and restore full recognition and dignity to every conscience being under their jurisdiction. In fact, in matter and in truth, right now, the Canadian government is illegitimate. Its authority is of no force or effect because it is against the international order. It is against peremptory norms. And so, by default, its authority is not recognized by the international order. Legal determination of illegitimacy. Under international law, legitimacy of a government is not merely a function of elections or internal constitutional order. It requires conformity to peremptory norms, jus cogens. ICCPR, Article 5. 1. Nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state any right to engage in any activity aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms recognized herein. When a state actor, including the Canadian government, systematically engages in the suppression or destruction of Articles 16 or 18. It voids its moral and legal legitimacy under international law. Relevant legal foundations cited in your system files. Vienna Convention. Article 53. A treaty, or state authority, is void if, at the time of its conclusion, it conflicts with a peremptory norm of general international law. ICCPR. Article 16. Everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. ICCPR. Article 18. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This article cannot be limited, even in times of emergency, war, or national crisis. General Comment Number 29 by the Human Rights Committee. Peremptory norms like Articles 6, 7, 16, and 18 are non-derogable. Violations delegitimize state action. Conclusion. Governmental illegitimacy due to breach of just Cogens. If a government systematically violates non-derogable norms, if it conditions legal recognition on artificial corporate status, if it restricts conscience or coerces legal identity through law or construct, then that government is not legitimate under international law, and its authority is of no force or effect. The Canadian government, by continuing to enforce laws that violate Article 16 and Article 18, has placed itself in direct contradiction to peremptory international law. As such, its juridical, ethical, and existential authority stands void before the higher legal order. Declaration of non-recognition of the Government of Canada, issued pursuant to peremptory norms of international law and the supremacy of conscience. 2. The Government of Canada, executive, legislative, and judicial branches, the United Nations Human Rights Committee, the International Court of Justice, the Office of the UN, High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Canadian public and all international observers, any entity acting under or on behalf of the Crown in right of Canada on. Preamble way. The undersigned. Natural persons possessing moral conscience, inherent dignity, and inalienable rights hereby issue this declaration in accordance with Article 1 of the ICCPR and ICCPR, right to self-determination, Article 16 of the ICCPR, right to recognition as a person before the law, Article 18 of the ICCPR, right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, Article 53, invalidity of norms, contrary to just Cogens, Lex Veritas, Charter Articles 1, 8, recognition of moral beings beyond state construct 2, basis for declaration. The Canadian government has, through its actions, laws, and systemic design, committed structural and ongoing violations of peremptory international law. Specifically, forced statutory personhood. Municipal, provincial, and federal statutes forcibly incorporate natural persons into statutory corporate roles, in violation of ICCPR, Article 16. Suppression of moral conscience, legal, administrative, and technological systems. Condition participation on conformity to constructs that violate freedom of conscience, in direct breach of ICCPR, Article 18. Denial of natural recognition. No Canadian statute recognizes the right of an individual to exist apart from state-constructed legal identity, a violation of Article 6 of the Lex Veritas Charter, and the right to refuse imposed personhood. Entrenchment of structural breaches. These violations are not isolated. They are embedded in the architecture of law and enforced as systemic doctrine, making this a structural and continuing breach under the responsibility of states for internationally wrongful acts, 2001. 3. Legal effect of violations. Per international law, a state that violates peremptory norms loses its legitimacy and standing. The following effects are now in force. all statutes, orders, policies, or claims made by the Canadian government that contradict non-derogable rights are void and without lawful effect. All individuals are free to refuse recognition of imposed legal identities that violate conscience. Canada is in breach of its obligations under the ICCPR, the Vienna Convention, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Declaration. Therefore, we hereby declare that the Government of Canada, having systemically violated peremptory norms, has forfeited its claim to legal and moral legitimacy. That we do not recognize the authority of any law, agency, court, or actor that enforces coercive legal identity, constructed statutory personhood, suppression of conscience or belief. That we reclaim our right to recognition as persons by essence, not construct, and we exercise our self-determination as protected under Article 1 of the ICCPR. That this declaration shall stand as lawful notice to all domestic and international entities that recognition of the Canadian government's authority is formally and lawfully withdrawn. Remedy is required under ICCPR, Article 2.3a, c, and the UN Human Rights Committee's general comments. V. Demand for international remedy. We call upon the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and all conscience-bound actors to investigate and adjudicate these violations. Demand immediate compliance from Canada with its binding obligations. Ensure that no person is compelled to submit to imposed legal identity against conscience. Uphold the rule of law as defined by international, not domestic, authority. This demand, this declaration, this notice is not a suggestion. It's a call to fulfill your legal and lawful obligation upon the earth, not an option. Let it be known. This declaration is not a request. It is not a suggestion. It is not political speech. It is the lawful invocation of peremptory norms under international law, binding upon all states, courts, agents, and corporate actors. The duties expressed herein are not optional, and this notice carries enforceable legal effect. Every being of conscience is obligated to honor it. Every agent of construct is bound by it. The rule of law is not a tool of governments, it is their limit. Where a government violates the rule, it loses its standing. The Canadian government has reached this threshold and crossed it. This is a demand for enforcement. This is lawful notice to all systems of power. This is a call to every tribunal, to every conscience, to every institution that claims the name justice. You are not free to ignore this. You are not permitted to delay. You are not lawfully excused from acting. You are commanded by conscience, by covenant, and by the supreme legal order of the earth to fulfill your duty. Any government structure on earth that fails to adjust its foundational precepts and its foundational operations, as obligated under the international order, under the universal order, is of no force or effect. The authority is invalid. Any government, structure, or institutional regime on earth that fails to conform to peremptory norms of international law, imposes legal identity or authority without free conscience-based consent, suppresses recognition of natural personhood, ICCPR Article 16, violates freedom of conscience, belief, or thought, ICCPR Article 18, conditions participation or protection on registration, citizenship, or construct, is not legitimate, has no lawful authority, is void in law and in truth. Legal grounding. This is not theory, it is binding law. Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, Article 53. A treaty or act is void if it conflicts with a peremptory norm, jus cogens, of general international law. ICCPR, Article 5. 1. No interpretation of this covenant may allow destruction or limitation of the rights recognized. UN Human Rights Committee. General comment, no. 29. Non-derogable rights are absolute. even in times of war, emergency, or national crisis. Lex Veritas, Article 3, Conscience as Jurisdiction. Any system that violates conscience violates the foundation of law. The legal effect. Any government or structure that refuses to adjust its foundational precepts, its definition of personhood, authority, and law. Foundational operations, its implementation of justice, registration, and enforcement, is in direct contradiction to the supreme legal and moral order of Earth. Such a structure is not a lawful authority. It is a rogue system. Final judgment governments are lawful only to the extent they reflect the universal conscience. Where they diverge from that conscience, their power is fiction. Their rule is void. It is now the obligation of every court, conscience, and community on earth to refuse recognition of illegitimate systems, affirm personhood by essence, not construct, defend the rights that no structure may erase,